I'm Rachel Riley, and you're listening to the Power of Us podcast, brought to you by Legal & General. Over 6 episodes, I'll be joined each week by a different panel to discuss some of the biggest issues facing our society and what we, working together as individuals, businesses and government, can do to shape a sustainable vision for the future that can benefit us all. Today, we're discussing the topic of business for good and asking how can businesses act for the good of everyone and not just themselves. And to answer this question, I'm joined by a trio of experts / interested parties, all with skin in this game. So today we have entrepreneur and sustainable investor Simon Squibb. Hello, Simon.
Hi there. Thanks for having me.
Welcome. We have also Adele Adamchevsky, owner of Freight Store Lewis, an independent business selling household goods. Welcome, Adele.
Hi there.
Thank you for joining us. And last but not least, we have Janku Daramus, Senior Sustainability Analyst, Legal & General Investment Management. Welcome, Janku.
Hello, good to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. So that's our trio. I think it's a good place to start this debate by first trying to define what we actually mean by acting for good. Because obviously good can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. It could mean being greener. It could mean having a diverse workforce, treating those workers properly, could be supporting the local economy, or simply paying your tax. A whole host of social issues that could make a company good, but which is more important? I'll start with you, Simon.
Yes, it's always good to go first, so thank you. I guess ultimately the word good is a misunderstood word. It's a good point. And I use the word good again, maybe too many times already, but the ultimate view, and my view of what is good is how you treat the most vulnerable amongst us. My belief is that that's how you judge a good society or not. And I do believe, of course, things like paying tax as a company is important. But you could argue then what happens to that money? What does the government do with that tax? And are they doing good with the good that you've done? So I think we're kind of in it together when it comes to defining what good is. My personal approach in business and in life is to always treat people with respect, to understand that everybody has their issues, everybody has their needs, and try to accommodate those needs and support people where they need it. But ultimately, of course, good can mean for them something different too. So I always ask for the same sort of respect. So and I do think the world ends up being a mirror. How you treat people is how they will treat you. So if you can define good and put it to a high bar, I think you will have a better life because of it.
So for you, Simon, good is all about people. So whether that's your workforce or your customers or your supply chain, it's about treating people properly.
100%. Yeah, I see my suppliers, for example, as partners in business, not as suppliers. I treat them with respect on pricing, and I see them as my equal. And I think that my business life has been better because of it.
And I'll ask you now, Adele, would you go along with that? Is people what makes a business good, or do you have to encompass elements of being green and, protecting animals and charities, or what is it for you?
I think I totally agree with Simon. I think you have to start from the human perspective. We are all, after all, humans, and looking at it from the perspective of how you want to be treated, no matter what, whether it's with business, with friendship, with all the social sort of entities of life as it goes daily. I think we all have a responsibility to treat people properly, to pay them well, to be human with everybody. Because actually, in the end, if you want to be treated a certain way, then you have to act that way yourself. It's setting a role model, a standard. So yeah, I think what Simon said is entirely where I'd start, and it's very much how I run my business. It has to be that you respect the people who work for you as well as with you. I never see people as being lesser because I'm paying them. You have to kind of keep it on an even keel.
So this kind of message basically has to start from the top down, doesn't it? It has to come from the CEO, the owner of the business, for it to filter through everybody else.
Yeah, and ultimately it will always make everybody have a much better relationship or understanding and recognition of that business. I think it's how you set the bar, and it's really important that the people at the top are the ones who take responsibility for that. And hopefully that filters through the workforce.
And Janku, as a senior sustainability analyst, where does your business, position good? What is good for you?
I think it's a great question, and my day job is in investing. I moonlight as a philosopher, so we can, what is the good? I think we'll tackle that question. We'll solve it right now. Now, on a more serious note, I think from where we sit, this notion of the good is in some degree thinking about the long term. So, a very tentative definition for me might be like some of the definitions proposed for the very notion of sustainability, meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of other generations to meet their own needs. And something in that speaks to me, I think, about how we should think about the role of companies, because if you're thinking of this broader sphere beyond just narrow self-interest, right? You've just heard about thinking about your suppliers as partners. That's one way of broadening this sphere of moral concern, if you will. If you think of a CEO that might, really think about the long-term growth of a company as opposed to, just a short-term bonus, and structuring systems and incentive structures in place to be conducive to that. So this idea of thinking long-term and sort of broadening the sphere of concern from, the communities you operate in, your stakeholders, your suppliers, your employees, that I think is a hallmark of a good business. And since you've mentioned the investing angle, I believe I'm privileged to work in a place that manages money for many, many investors, oftentimes pension money. And that gives you a certain kind of mindset and perspective, right? You're supposed to be asking questions from the companies you invest in about, their business in 30, 40 years' time. Will they still be around when we still need to pay pensions? So that to me is a mixture of, the long-term and broad moral concern.
And it's interesting you mentioned pensions, because it's something I hadn't thought about recently till I read about, vegans accidentally investing in the fur trade because we don't actually know where our money's going in our pension pots. Do you think it's possible to be a good company overall while you're neglecting or you're being bad in one particular area?
Well, it's a very big and important debate, because you're touching on something which is absolutely, I think, reshaping already the industry and will continue to reshape the finance industry. And it's this engagement of consumers with their own money, be it through their investments, their pensions. So that side, as you've just said, people starting to realize that their own values may or may not clash with their investments. I think that's absolutely key. And as a small anecdote, I remember going to the climate protests in September, and I was speaking to, very environmentally minded people there. There was one renewable energy engineer there, and speaking to them, it hadn't occurred to them that they might be, for example, through their pensions, propping up the very same coal plants that they were trying to render obsolete in their day jobs. So that trend is absolutely key and is driving different demand for products. The reverse of it around companies, being good or bad, that is a very tricky assessment. And it is, to be fair, one which we're not trying to make, because most companies are actually on a spectrum. It's very hard to say, bad or good. It's quite a nuanced debate a lot of the time. And what matters to me is actually, how can you make the companies be the best they can in their sector, as opposed to, going up to an oil company and asking them, why aren't you, the Red Cross? That's a different debate. And it's, at least within the day job, it's much harder to articulate that view.
And Adele, I'll turn to you, because obviously you're the owner of a business, and these issues are really embedded in your ethos and how you operate. But for some companies, that's, not necessarily the case. So what is going to drive the majority of companies in a good direction? Is it, as Yankee mentioned, is it the carrot, or is it going to be the stick?
Talking from my own perspective as a shop owner, it will be the customers, and already they are constantly driving us to do better, to make better decisions. And even if it's always on our mind, how do we sort of build this brand to be better with everything, packaging, how we deal with products, the materials we use, everything is considered. There's always more you can do, and customers are really becoming the driving force behind that for us. In a way, they're keeping us on our toes, and they're becoming more informed. And sometimes you can look at that and go, it's a bit of a pain when someone's saying, can you make sure you don't post me something that has a single piece of plastic on it? But instead we're having to go, okay, we're considering this, it's coming to us constantly. So now we really have to reconsider how we're doing every little element. So every aspect of our business is being constantly analysed and processed by ourselves. We're taking that on as an effort. It's obviously more work, but they really are the driving force behind it, because really we have to have a good relationship with our customers. Without them, we don't exist. So whether it be our wholesale side of things or just the one-to-one retail between customers and us as the shop, we're listening.
I'll ask Simon, as a sustainable investor, when you're looking at, what businesses to invest in, are you having to balance off what's potentially a better business to the financial gains that you can make quickly? Or are you finding that actually, as technology moves forward, the better options can be the most profitable, can be the greenest?
But I think the whole idea, this has been floated before, that only successful people are thinking about purpose. I mean, I started thinking about purpose in my 20s, and I was lucky enough to be surrounded by people that really cared a lot more about purpose than money. I lived in Hong Kong for a while, and again, everybody there is rich. Money doesn't mean anything. So I think what I noticed was that the school teacher, for example, had a very deep purpose, and I was just trying to make money. So I felt that I could do more. And I have a huge amount, you just mentioned it earlier, a huge amount of respect now for the frontline workers, the folks that are in the supermarket, making sure the supermarkets stay open so people eat. I'm glad that this crisis has highlighted how important these people are to our very existence, our survival. And so I think that purpose can come in many forms. I'm now able to invest and support businesses that hopefully can solve problems on a mass scale. But I think individuals can make a difference just by teaching kids at school and doing it in a way that brings knowledge to that next generation that ultimately makes the world a better place long term. So I think there's many ways to install purpose. It's not just about a big conglomerate trying to eradicate petrol cars and bringing a whole new series of problems. I think it's also about empowering the individual, educating the individual. The word purpose was never mentioned to me at school. It's never once was written on a blackboard and said, let's discuss purpose. And I think it should be. And I think that's where it starts. It starts from that very young age. And I wish I hadn't had to learn it on my own. I wish I hadn't had to wait until I was in my 20s to understand that this word was so important. And I think that one way to fix that would be start in the classroom, because those kids will eventually be CEOs of companies, and they will be the leaders of the world, and they will have a clear purpose.
Yeah, I think kids today are generally, aware of a lot more problems than possibly I was when I was at school. So say, your customers are aware of these issues. Say, they're fully on board. They want to support better businesses. They want to support more ethical businesses. Adele, how as consumers or investors, how can we know which companies are the ones that are worth supporting, the ones that are worth investing? How does business tell us, or how do we gauge it?
Something we struggle with endlessly is trying to express what it is that we're doing and why we're doing it, and how we're trying to come across with the clear ethics that we have, without being braggy, without being sort of holier than now. Look what we're doing, isn't it great? We're really bad at doing that. We're not very good at showing it, and still lots of our regular customers don't really know it unless they come into the shop and then they see it because we're there behind the counter doing the thing, doing the work, designing the products. They see everything happening very physically in store. But like Simon says now, everyone has to have an online presence. You can't just be, it's very hard to just be a shop. If you're doing the type of thing we are, then you have to have an online presence and expressing and showing people what you do. Because a lot of it, like I explained earlier, is quite boring. A lot of people don't want to know that. The modern day social media side of the world is they want to see the beautiful stuff.
My fear, and the fear of many, is that on social media, things can be very, very black or white. And there is this cancel culture. So in some regards, companies being scared that they will be found out for their bad practices and that will be exposed is a good thing. But also, can social media be trusted? I don't personally believe that it can. I think there can be, excellent, happy stories that we can celebrate without cynicism, and that's wonderful. But also there can be the pitchfork mob based on untruths and fake news and hearsay and, possibly politically motivated from we don't know where. So how can we cut through that? How can we, provide some kind of gold standard that people can trust to know that a company is trying its best, it has good motives, and it's actually doing these things rather than just, impressionistic views. So Yankee, do you have any ideas on that?
Thank you. I think, again, you're touching on all the key issues here. One thing that came to mind is this idea of transparency, but in a slightly different angle than the certifications that companies go to, or, approval on social media. And I can share a little bit of the experience of working with companies around climate change. And one of the tools we've used there is indeed naming and faming, or on the flip side, naming and shaming companies that we felt fell behind. And, what goes into that is a big assessment, all sorts of indicators and data points, and our own meetings with the companies we invest in and many other things. But the output is more interesting, whereby once a year, we published a ranking at Elgin of what we thought were the corporate leaders and laggards on climate change. And the important bit is that for companies falling behind, our message was not, look, you're an oil company, you're bad. It's actually, you're an oil company and you're not keeping up with other peers in your sector. And therefore, we might, vote against the chair of your company when we as shareholders get to vote on these appointments once a year. Or we might even divest your company from certain funds. So, there's a penalty that comes with pointing the finger. And that approach has been surprisingly powerful. We've had companies come back to us and say, look, once I saw my name in the press, our sustainability team was able to speak to the CEO. They had the year, internal processes had changed. So that element of trying to tell a story around the companies which are doing good and the companies which are doing bad is, I think, an element that we need more of. And we particularly need more of it, I think, in the investment industry, where there's a lot of concentrated power. And a lot of the times, the end beneficiaries, the clients, the pension holders, mom and dad, they might not always be aware that, they are investors, that through their pensions, they're invested in these companies, that they have a voice, therefore. So being able to link that, the end investor with their investments, the companies, that I think can make a difference in getting people to understand a bit more. And we've seen this in, we've done surveys, we've done focus groups, and we've seen how people's views change when they understand a little bit more about what they're doing, what they're invested in. And equally, perceptions of companies changed. You might think particularly like conglomerates usually get a bad rep, right? Multinationals, the big bloated company. But then you can start to distinguish and you find, the steps companies are taking on their supply chain or other measures. Not many companies know, for example, that oil companies make hand sanitizer, right? Or face masks, which was very useful in the pandemic. So there is a chance to bring nuance to the debate, I think. And there's an element of transparency which matters. I would just caution that, to my mind, it's not just simply transparency in the sense of giving choice to the consumer, because that sometimes can be paralytic. We also need to put pressure on key gatekeepers. Investors are one, community policymakers are another one. Sometimes it's very easy to just lob the ball back into the court of the consumer and they'll make up their mind. There are also key intermediaries who benefit from a little pressure.
I like what you've said. It sounds like everything's being democratized. So it's just more transparency through social media, just telling people what's happening in companies and instead of necessarily berating them. Simon, I gave you the first word. I'm going to give you the last word. As a sustainable investor, you have people coming to pitch to you to receive your investment. They must be putting their best foot forward, selling their best points. Do you think they do that enough themselves when they go out into the world of business to their customers, or do they need to sing their praises a little bit more?
Just be authentic is always the thing I say to everybody who's after anything. To me, sales itself has got a bad rep because there's a lot of people that aren't authentic. So I think just be authentic. I would add as well, personally, I'm experimenting with a new model, which is kind of crazy, where you think about everything except money. I think money can corrupt things. It can also help move things forward. And I like the example earlier mentioned about the carrot dangled in front of companies. If you do well, you'll get this carrot, and if you don't, you won't. And I think taking money out of the conversation is really interesting. And when you start thinking about how you can make an impact outside of making money for yourself or your shareholders, that gets really, really fascinating for me. And so even for myself, say people come to me for money, but I often help people for no money at all, no return, no capital gain, nothing, because I want to help them because they've got an idea that can make the world a better place. I've often met people and realized that there's someone who'd be a better investor than me and introduced them with nothing for me to get from it at all, other than that person then goes on to be successful and gets the right investor in their business. And so it's really fascinating thing. I've only been really operating this model of not thinking about money for the last couple of years. And it's really, really exciting, because when money's involved, that's when good and bad becomes blurry. When you make decisions for yourself or your shareholders or your own ecosystem benefit. But when you do take money out of the equation, all you're thinking when you meet someone is, how can I make their lives better? If you give, you get much more. So you actually end up a lot more successful.
If you give, you get a lot more. I think that's the perfect note to end up on. And I've certainly learned a lot from you three today. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
You've been listening to the Power of Us podcast, hosted by me, Rachel Riley, and brought to you by Legal & General. Do join us next week when we'll be looking at technology and asking, is it working for us?